Welcome to another episode of 5 Questions in 5 Minutes. And we have with us this week Phil Barden, who's always struck me as something of a unique proposition, not only because you've moved from those senior and international roles in Diageo and Unilever and T-Mobile and so on, across to the world of consumer insight and decision science and the resultant reframing of marketing, I would say. But actually also because, and I mean this actually, you appear to do that with an almost incredibly egoless self. You seem to be very generous in the way you bring everything together. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes, 5 questions, trying to see if Phil Barden has an ego. Is decision science or behavioral science essentially a rebranding exercise for psychology, Phil? Or would I guess the question is, would an old-fashioned psychologist find something new and different if they just landed and kind of read your book or landed today?
Yeah, great question. I don't think it's a rebranding. I think it's a reframing of human behavior. For me and the guys I work with, decision science or behavioral science, I think they're interchangeable terms, but they imply a more holistic understanding of behavior drawn from different fields of study, academic and scientific study, certainly psychology, but even breaking psychology down to component parts such as cognitive psychology and social and evolutionary psychology as one part of that overall holistic input. The other parts would be neuroscience, so cognitive and affective neuroscience, and then more recently what's popularly been termed behavioral economics or nudge theory.
What did you dream of becoming or doing when you were at school? If you hadn't ended up in the dirty world of commerce and branding, what else might you have done, Phil?
Well, I confess for a while I did dream of becoming a professional skateboarder, but that was short-lived. Both my parents were teachers, so that was one thing I was determined not to become. But actually, quite early on at school, I teamed up with a friend, and he and I used to write a lot of stuff together for school plays and school reviews and things like that. He ended up becoming a copywriter and creative director. So he kind of introduced me in school to the world of advertising, and that whole idea of creating stuff struck me as very exciting. That led me to then explore marketing, and the more I explored that, the more convinced I was that I wanted to get into the brand side rather than the advertising side, because I liked the idea of creating something tangible. And in fact, that was fulfilled when in my student days, I had a placement with United Biscuits, who at the time owned Terrier's chocolates, and I was instrumental in launching the Terrier's chocolate orange Easter egg. And I can remember the joy of actually holding this thing, fresh off the production line. And for me, that was like a real fulfillment of something that had gone from just a germ of an idea through to fruition.
Yeah, I think I remember being very excited about it as an eater. Can you explain to us how you define the goals, that, as you refer to them, that people have, and how that might or should influence the way marketeers approach branding?
Yeah, I don't think goals is anything necessarily dramatically new for marketeers. We've always thought that there were functional reasons why people buy products and services, and there were more social, emotional, psychological reasons why they buy them. And I think what goals does, the real joy for me when I first worked with Decode, was finding that goals was a field of study that pervaded psychology and neuroscience, and there seemed to be very strong alignment between the different scientific disciplines that goals are fundamental to human motivation. That's significant, right? That is fundamental to everything we are doing in marketing, because ultimately we're in the business of behavior change. And if behavior is driven by motivation, and what motivates us is goal achievement, then we ought to find out about it. So goals are really a mixture of, and another term you can use, some people use, are jobs to be done. It's like, we hire this product or service to do a job for us.
So that leads me very nicely to another question which occurred to me when reading your book, which is, in the back of my mind, I was aware that the guy Stanislavski, when writing advice to method actors, came up with this idea of 7 questions that you should know about your character. Who am I? What do I want? How am I going to get it? And I wondered if you'd come across that, and if you had, whether there was there seems to be some sort of cross-referencing or link there between, if you're going to try and create a human being on stage, you need to understand how they work. And if you're going to understand how they work, you might as well buy Phil Barden's book as Stanislavski's, because it's the same thing.
Well, I think it's an interesting analogy, and I like the way that it helps actors understand their characters' motivations. I think the difference between Stanislavski's method and what we talk about is Stanislavski's questions and the process that the actor goes through in arriving at how the character behaves is very explicit. You know, you reflect on the motivations, you reflect on, why am I here, what was I doing prior to arriving here, what am I doing in this interaction, etc. It's very explicit and very reflective, so-called system 2, if you like. Whereas goals that motivate us, particularly the social, emotional, psychological goals, operate really at an implicit level, at the sort of pre-conscious system 1 level. So I think that's a key difference.
So, Phil, question 5. What is your favorite ever book? You can have a book or a film or an album, but only one. And why is it your favorite?
I'd probably choose a book, and the book is The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And the reason I would choose that is my sister gave it to me, I think, when I was about 9 or 10. And it was probably the first sort of grown-up book that I'd ever read. And I mean grown up in the sense of quite difficult to read at that age, and sort of properly written, rather than the sort of Enid Blyton standard fare than school books that one had been brought up with. And it just transported me. I think I was in Tolkien's world. You know, he writes so beautifully. And it just fired my imagination. I remember just being glued to it and not wanting to put it down. And I have reread it a couple of times since, and gone on to read the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well, and not been disappointed.
Do we meet Gollum? Yeah. Do we meet Gollum in The Hobbit? We do, don't we?
Yes.
Before? Yeah. No, yes. I agree. It was a really influential book for me. Phil, I've run out of time. That is amazing. 5 questions in 5 minutes. Thank you so much for being our guest today. That's
pleasure. Thank you.